Lisa had always known how to read a room. She could decode silences, measure ambitions behind glances, weigh insecurities hidden under laughter. And when she first walked into the sleek glass tower that housed one of the most powerful consulting firms in the city, she wore her intelligence like perfume. Subtle, undeniable, meant to linger, meant to be remembered by men who were used to forgetting women like her. She had the resume, of course, an MBA with honors, internships with teeth, a killer instinct that sharpened with every whispered boardroom decision she wasn't yet invited to hear. But Lisa understood that in a world like this, where power rarely shifted hands unless someone bled for it, brilliance alone wasn't enough. It had to be wielded, and that meant recognizing where the levers of control were, who pulled them and who pretended not to. His name was Daniel Crane, CEO predator visionary, mid-50s with a jaw like a guillotine and a voice that moved markets. And he noticed her not because she was the best analyst in her cohort, though she was, but because of how she never smiled unless there was something to gain from it, how she never flirted openly yet radiated a kind of power that teased submission from men who didn't even realize they were submitting. The first time he called her into his corner office, it was under the guise of discussing a quarterly report. She had over-delivered as usual, but the door clicked shut behind her with the kind of finality that rewrote the air, and when he stood from behind his polished desk and moved to sit beside her, legs wide, elbow resting casually on the leather armrest, she met his gaze without blinking because Lisa didn't play coy, didn't shrink, didn't confuse submission with weakness. She saw the hunger in him, not just sexual but strategic, the kind that fed off control and used people like cogs in a gold-plated machine. And when he placed a hand on her thigh, slow and deliberate, she didn't flinch, didn't protest, didn't even look down. She simply tilted her head slightly as if to say, "Is this your opening move?" And when he kissed her, mouth firm, practiced, entitled, she kissed him back like she was signing a contract, her signature written not in ink but in breath, in consent wrapped in calculation. The affair began that night in a hotel suite with a skyline view and expensive scotch poured into crystal glasses, and Lisa made sure he saw her not just as a body but as a weapon, sharp, indispensable, tailored to his appetite and his ambition. She learned the things his wife didn't care to ask, the pressure points of his pride, the damage done to his ego when the board questioned his authority, the fear he masked when quarterly losses dipped. And she became not just his mistress but his confidant, his strategist, his fix. Always there with the right numbers, the right whisper, the right smile that said she could make things disappear or appear depending on what he needed. In return, she didn't ask for money, too vulgar, but for exposure, for access, for invitations to meetings that weren't meant for analysts, for promotions that would be explained away by talent, but were really about leverage. Whispers followed, of course. Jealous colleagues with bitter mouths, other women who warned her about men like him. But Lisa didn't listen because she wasn't a girl playing at power, she was power, cloaked in silk blouses and perfectly timed pauses. And while others played checkers with HR policies, she played chess with executive egos. When Daniel's wife eventually found out, the fallout was quieter than expected. Some tears, some threats, a separation that was kept out of the press. And through it all, Lisa remained steady, untouchable, a shadow behind the throne, never claiming the crown but guiding the hand that wore it. Years passed, and her name climbed the ranks faster than anyone else in her intake class. Director, then vice president, then senior VP, always accompanied by polite applause and forced smiles from men who feared her and women who misunderstood her. But what none of them realized was that the affair had ended long ago, around the time Daniel began to lose his edge. When Lisa stopped returning his late-night texts and started scheduling her own closed-door meetings, not with him but with the board members he underestimated. She knew how to pivot, how to replace need with strategy, desire with timing. And when Daniel finally stepped down, citing stress, exhaustion, vague health issues, Lisa was already being floated as his potential successor, her name dropped in private lunches and shareholder calls, her past sanitized and repackaged as tenacity, her loyalty reframed as vision. And no one dared to question how she got there because by then she was there, seated at the head of the table with a smile that gave nothing away, a woman who had turned an affair into a ladder and climbed it, without ever looking down. Lisa never planned on being anyone's secret, but she had always been a student of power, how it moved, how it cloaked itself in charm, how it flowed not from titles but from whispers, from proximity to influence. And long before she met Daniel Crane, she had mastered the subtle art of presence, of knowing when to speak and when silence said more, when to smile like an invitation and when to stare like a challenge. From a small apartment in a Chicago suburb. The daughter of a receptionist and a man who disappeared when she was 9, Lisa had learned early that the world wasn't made fair, it was made negotiable, and some people learned to negotiate better than others. She studied like her future depended on it because it did, clawed her way into Northwestern, then Harvard, always 2 steps ahead of the boys who thought her pretty but not quite brilliant, too polished to be taken seriously but too sharp to ignore, until she made sure she was indispensable everywhere she went, even if it meant watching men take credit for her ideas, watching managers nod while repeating her points as their own, swallowing the bitterness of being passed over not because she lacked merit but because she lacked a certain anatomy, and each of these slights became a brick in the silent fortress she was building inside herself. So when she landed the job at Grenfell and Rowe, one of the top strategy firms in the country, she wore her ambition like skin. Natural, inseparable. And she understood immediately that Daniel Crane, the silver-haired 6'2" with the calm voice and wolf's eyes, was the real gateway to everything. He wasn't just the boss. He was the bloodstream of the company, the man whose approval could make or break any career, and Lisa didn't chase his attention. Not openly, not crudely, but she was deliberate. A comment here, a flawlessly executed pitch there, moments of presence that made her glow just long enough to haunt his mind later when she was no longer in the room. It wasn't long before he began to call her in. First for data, then for insight, then for thought partnership, a phrase he liked to use with women he didn't yet know how to categorize. And though the flirtation simmered between them, she kept her tone professional, her outfits modest but tailored, always one level beneath what might invite rumor but never beneath notice. And the night it all changed, when he leaned back in his leather chair, eyes scanning her with a mixture of curiosity and hunger, asking if she wanted to join him for a late drink, to unwind after the quarterly madness. She said yes with a calm that masked the storm inside her, knowing exactly what she was stepping into, but also knowing that if she played it right she wouldn't be stepping into anything, she'd be stepping up. The affair began not in a flurry of passion but in a negotiation of control. Daniel testing her submission, Lisa testing his need, and while he saw a beautiful young analyst enchanted by his charm, she saw a powerful man slowly surrendering to the comfort of her silence, the intelligence in her questions. The way she never made demands but always gave him what he didn't know he needed. Validation, admiration, the illusion of safety. The sex was mechanical at first, strategic almost, but Lisa turned it into a language, a means of becoming necessary. She asked nothing, never lingered, kept it compartmentalized, and in doing so made herself unforgettable because she never made him feel trapped, only chosen. Over the months, the rhythm of their rendezvous carved itself into their lives. Tuesday nights at the Peninsula, Saturdays at a private condo he owned under a shell company, sometimes even office liaisons behind locked doors. And in parallel her career blossomed like a perfectly timed orchid, her promotions quick but never suspicious, her influence growing through soft power. People started asking her opinion before presentations, clients requested her on projects beyond her pay grade, directors invited her to dinners, and while some whispered, because the world always whispers, when women rise too quickly, none dared confront her directly because Lisa had made herself bulletproof. Her work was immaculate, her demeanor serene, her boundaries clear, and she never let herself slip, not once. Not even when Daniel told her after one particularly tense board meeting, that he sometimes imagined leaving it all behind for her, that he wondered what life would look like if it were just them somewhere quiet, warm, far from this brutal world of performance and secrets. And Lisa smiled softly, placing a hand on his chest, not to encourage or discourage but to anchor him, because she didn't need a man to leave his wife, she needed him to keep opening doors. And yet the power balance began to shift, slowly, invisibly, like the subtle change in ocean tides, when Daniel started depending on her not just for comfort but for counsel, when he began using her phrasing in investor calls, when he asked her to read memos before they went out, when he admitted he couldn't trust his COO and asked what she thought, and Lisa gave him answers measured in weight and consequence, shaping the future of the company one sentence at a time. And when his wife finally discovered the affair, through an email left open on a shared iPad, it didn't explode, it imploded, quietly and with elegance. Divorce lawyers, sealed agreements, a public statement about irreconcilable differences, and Daniel didn't lose his position but he lost something else. An edge, a focus. And Lisa, watching it all unfold, knew. The clock had started ticking. She began spending less time with him, citing work, travel, family visits that never happened, and instead started cultivating her next layer of alliances, mentoring new analysts, befriending the CFO's assistant, making herself useful to board members in ways that had nothing to do with charm and everything to do with delivery. When Daniel tried to pull her back in, reminding her of their connection, she leaned in with a kiss, soft and final, and told him he was tired, that he deserved peace. And when he looked into her eyes, he saw something he hadn't before, that he was no longer holding her, he was being held. The board noticed, of course, how Daniel had lost some of his fire, how Lisa seemed to anticipate problems before they emerged, how clients trusted her even before formal introductions, and soon the whispers reversed direction. She's the future. They began to say, she gets it. And Lisa played the game exactly as she always had. Without urgency, without panic, without breaking a single rule, only bending the ones that were made to be bent. And when Daniel finally stepped down, voluntarily, citing burnout, travel fatigue, a desire to focus on philanthropy, it was Lisa's name that surfaced most often as successor, though she wasn't the most senior, nor the most obvious, but she was the one everyone trusted not to embarrass them, not to fail, and by then she was a ghost in every room, not always present but always felt. When she walked into her new office, the same one where Daniel once called her in to discuss potential, she paused, not out of nostalgia, but because she saw her own reflection in the glass and realized she had become the thing she once studied. Not a woman in power, but power in the shape of a woman. And she didn't smile, didn't cry, didn't gloat, because Lisa understood what it meant to win quietly, to rise without noise, to sleep with the king and become the queen, not by inheritance, but by design. But power, once acquired, is not a destination. It's a condition, a living, breathing organism that must be fed, protected, manipulated. And Lisa understood that better than anyone, which is why, within weeks of becoming interim CEO, she quietly assembled her own network. Not a formal team, not an executive committee, but a shadow web of loyalty made up of overlooked people. Smart, loyal assistants, ambitious juniors, frustrated mid-level managers. People whose talents had been underused and whose gratitude could be weaponized. She gave them small wins, then big ones, remembered birthdays, made herself available when no one else did, and in doing so, created a kind of soft empire within Grenfell and Rowe, one that couldn't be charted on an org structure but pulsed through every department like a second heartbeat. And the board, still reeling from Daniel's sudden exit and eager for stability, gave her the benefit of the doubt, especially after she led the London expansion with surgical precision, negotiating a merger no one thought possible, charming stakeholders, slashing redundancies, and doubling the firm's valuation in less than 6 months. Headlines followed: the calm storm, Lisa Teller, the quiet rise, and she accepted interviews with the same measured poise she'd shown all her life, revealing nothing, always pivoting the conversation toward data, toward performance, never emotion. But behind that serene exterior she felt the currents shifting again, darker this time, because success breeds envy. And her rise had not gone unnoticed by those who once dismissed her. One of them was Victoria Hess, the CFO, a brilliant but bitter woman who'd been promised the CEO role in hushed hallway conversations years ago, who saw Lisa not as a peer but as an interloper who'd skipped the line. And though Victoria never said it directly, Lisa could feel the tension in every finance meeting, every budgetary review, every pointed question masked as fiscal responsibility. And she knew it was only a matter of time before the knives came out. So she prepared, not with counterattacks, but with insulation, building alliances within the audit committee, securing praise from institutional investors, quietly inviting a rising black female VP from an adjacent competitor to join their ranks, diversifying her influence in ways that made her harder to dislodge without sparking headlines the firm didn't want to explain. And when the rumors started, whispers about her past with Daniel, insinuations that her ascent was more sexual than strategic, Lisa didn't panic, didn't confront, didn't play defense. Instead, she leaned into performance, doubling profit margins, cutting loss-making verticals, hosting an industry summit where she spoke not of leadership, but of legacy, a word that made old men in the room nervous because it suggested permanence, and permanence from a woman like her, young, composed, and unflinching, was more dangerous than any scandal. Still, the pressure mounted. An anonymous ethics complaint, a mysteriously leaked photo from the Peninsula elevator, a hint of a story about a favoritism culture on a fringe business blog. And Lisa, sensing the temperature rise, decided to do what only the most dangerous leaders do. She baited the fire. She orchestrated an internal review, called an outside counsel, and insisted on full transparency, even as she already held the strings, because she knew where the bodies were buried, because she had never sent anything she couldn't explain. And because she had years ago befriended the firm's head of compliance over weekly coffees no one paid attention to. The review cleared her, of course it did, but it scorched others. 2 directors quietly asked to resign, Victoria Hess placed on medical leave, pending investigation into expense report inconsistencies, and just like that the field cleared once again. Lisa emerged not untouched but forged like steel, her voice a little lower, her emails even shorter, her gaze more impossible to read, and yet in the privacy of her penthouse where the city lights cast her face in soft silver, Lisa sometimes sat in silence, wondering not whether it had all been worth it, because she had never doubted that, but whether she could ever truly let go, whether there would ever be a moment when she didn't have to measure every word, every look, every breath. The loneliness of power was not new to her, she had anticipated it, even prepared for it, but it wore different masks. The friends who stopped calling, the men who feared her, the women who both envied and admired her, unsure if they wanted to be her or destroy her. And still she pressed on, not because she had no other choice, but because there was nothing else she wanted more. Not love, not rest, not redemption. And one evening at a charity gala where she stood in a black dress that looked like it had been poured onto her skin, she locked eyes with Daniel across the room for the first time in over a year. He looked older, thinner, adrift in the way that only once powerful men can be, and for a flicker of a moment, something almost human passed between them. A memory maybe, or a ghost. But then she turned, glass in hand, smile immaculate, and disappeared into a crowd that now parted for her like water around a ship. Because Lisa was no longer someone's protege, no longer someone's affair, no longer a woman who needed permission. She was the storm that others adjusted their sails for, and the winds were only just beginning to pick up. The years that followed were a crucible, burning away all illusions of invincibility as Lisa, now fully CEO, encountered the true cost of the throne she'd claimed. Relentless scrutiny from shareholders hungry for short-term gains, whispered betrayals from allies who had once smiled too warmly, a media landscape that adored to feast on any hint of scandal, and a personal life that shrank to the size of an echo, where relationships were transactions measured in favors. Loyalty was a currency more volatile than stocks, and nights alone became her only sanctuary. Yet even as the weight of the crown pressed down on her, Lisa's mind was sharper, more ruthless than ever, weaving webs of influence that stretched beyond boardrooms, into political corridors, philanthropic foundations, the opaque world of private equity, where her firm now held stakes in ventures both dazzling and shadowed, where every handshake was a gamble and every promise a contract in disguise. Then came the crisis. A sudden market plunge triggered by a competitor's collapse, a data breach that exposed confidential client information, the kind of perfect storm designed to swallow the weak. And Lisa responded not with panic, but with a cold, calculated fury, ordering a restructuring so brutal it made headlines for months, severing ties, firing executives who questioned her decisions, personally negotiating bailout terms with international investors in midnight calls that blurred the line between work and obsession. During this chaos, Daniel reemerged not as a lover or an adversary, but as a bitter commentator in the press, subtly undermining her leadership, hinting at secrets only she could refute, forcing Lisa to confront ghosts she'd hoped were buried deep. Yet instead of faltering, she used the moment to demonstrate her mastery, orchestrating a public appearance that was equal parts apology and assertion, acknowledging mistakes without admitting weakness, promising transparency while tightening her grip, turning a potential scandal into a showcase of resilience. But power, she realized, is a paradox. It offers unparalleled freedom and yet demands total surrender. And as the pressure mounted, as friends became foes, as each victory tasted more like survival than triumph, Lisa faced the ultimate question. Was she willing to sacrifice everything? The last fragments of privacy, the fragile bonds of friendship, even her own sense of self, to remain at the summit? Or could she redefine the rules, stepping down on her own terms to become something rarer, something that transcended titles and tabloid fodder? The answer came unexpectedly one rainy night in her office overlooking the city skyline, when she finally closed her laptop after hours of planning and looked at her reflection in the glass. Not as Lisa the strategist, the mistress, the CEO, but simply as Lisa, a woman who had fought her entire life to be seen and now wondered what it meant to be free. The decision was swift. She would relinquish the title, but not the power, stepping into a new role as chairwoman and mentor, a shadow leader. Shaping futures from behind the scenes, a guardian of legacies both her own and others. And as she walked out of the building for the last time as Sue, the night air cool against her skin, she felt something she hadn't in years. A quiet peace, a promise to herself that her story was no longer about climbing a ladder built on secrets and favors but about building a foundation strong enough to last beyond her. A legacy defined not by who she loved or used, but by the empire she chose to nurture and protect in her own image. And in that moment Lisa Teller smiled, not because she had won, but because she had finally become more than the sum of her ambitions, a woman who had played the game and changed it forever.